Hello, everybody. This is Anna and Bryan from a Waterworld podcast, and today we have our next guest for AI episode, Michaela Ternasky-Holland, who is a Peabody-nominated and Emmy Award-winning director. Hi, Michaela. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And maybe for our listeners, can you give a quick introduction to yourself and your background so they know where you're coming from and what's your story?
Of course. Well, like Anna said, I am a director, and I've had just the pleasure of being able to really work in a sort of tech agnostic environment for most of my career. I actually started as a dancer and a performer. I dropped out of college to pursue my love of dance on Disney Cruise Line. I came back and finished college, but while I was doing that, I was dancing all over theme parks in Southern California, like Disneyland, Legoland, and SeaWorld. And while I was doing that, I realized that there's this very powerful essence to storytelling when you give people agency, when you allow them to be immersed or interact with the story. And so this really inspired me to pursue using emerging technology to replicate storytelling agency that you would find in like a theme park environment or you'd find on like a cruise ship environment. And that's really what got me into doing virtual reality and augmented reality and AI even before it became what it is today with the generative type of technology. And so I left California and moved to New York, and I worked and lived there for over a decade where I was working with Time Magazine on some of their first VR and AR projects. I was working with the Nobel Peace Center, with Games for Change, with the United Nations, with the Museum of the Moving Image. And recently, I have been working more and more with animation and storytelling. When I first started a VR animated series with Meta. And that's really what teed up my current interest, which is how do we leverage generative AI workflows in the animation pipeline?
I'm also curious about what was your kind of, initial, how did you first discover maybe the potential of AI and what made you decide, oh, okay, wow, this is something I want to explore further? Like, where was that? Can you describe that kind of light bulb moment where you decided, oh, okay, this is something I really want to sort of really dive into? Like, how was that
Sure.
experience for you?
Yeah, I have been exposed to AI and storytelling even before the generative boom happened the last few years. I started first with seeing how some of my colleagues were using voice activated technology. I worked with Storyfile for a little while, which was an organization that would interview people, and then based on the interview answers that that person gave, someone would walk up to the hologram or the video and they would say, tell me about your childhood. And then the natural language processing or machine learning would hear those words come out of someone's mouth and match the right answer to the person's question, right? And so this was the way we were playing with AI. We were using AI as a way to do voice activated interactions in VR headsets. We were using early AI technology to do small interactive performances. But the world of generative AI has really kind of exploded what is possible with these technologies. And so for me, my first exposure to generative AI was through my colleague's project named Tulpomancer, which premiered at Venice. My colleague Erin Santiago worked on it as the technical director. And it was basically you would go up to a computer, you would type in a lot of answers to questions, and then in real time, those answers would get generated into a script, it would get generated into visuals, and you would basically see this kind of dreamlike sequence made specifically for you in the VR headset. And so to me, I had seen very early, like the early Stable Diffusion models, the early ChatGPT models, but I wasn't as interested in using the technology until I found a creative use case for it. And so my first foray really into diving into generative AI was when I collaborated with Erin Santiago and we created an installation that was all about cultural erasure and thinking about speculative futures as well as the past. And what was great is we could use generative AI as this metaphor for grief, right? When you generate an image of a person, it's not necessarily a real person, even if it looks like a real person. And this was a metaphor for some of our own imaginations as Filipino Americans who, we don't really have the most accurate data or information about our ancestors. So trying to find that using generative AI technology, even if it was a visual description or a visual asset of those ancestors, was a really interesting mechanism for us as artists. So I had started playing with generative AI technology from an installation standpoint, but it wasn't until Tribeca Festival approached me with the OpenAI Sora program, where Sora had not yet been released to the public, and they wanted me and 4 other filmmakers to create an independent short film in 4 weeks using the Sora platform, that I really dove into the kind of idea of using generative AI technology for making films. And, there is a lot to be said about that project, but I will just briefly say that this was back when it was all text to video. So we weren't able to upload images as references. We weren't able to upload videos as references. We were just doing text-based prompting. And so quickly, I realized I wanted to do something that was animation. I wanted to do something that involved my animators from my Meta VR for Good and Meta animated series. I instantly knew I wanted to bring in my score composer, my sound designer. So the first thing I did when I was approached by Tribeca was I put together a team of people. And I think that's a really important part of this that I want to emphasize on this interview, is that I'm not the type of person who just makes a film with just me and a computer. I'm the type of director and person who likes to collaborate with people and leverage tools like AI to make films or to make experiences.
I think it's just like I want to dive a little bit deeper in this project. It's called Echoes of Legend, right?
Yeah, so the project, okay. So the timeline, no, it's okay. So the timeline of it all is that the film I made with Tribeca and OpenAI Sora was called Thank You, Mom. And then after that, I was able to get some funding from a startup called Dreamflare. They funded me to do a holiday short film called The Christmas Recipe, and they funded me to do a micro animated series called Echoes of Legend. And so that was basically over the course of a year. So June 2024 was when I made Thank You, Mom. December of 2024 was when we released The Christmas Recipe. And then June of 2025 was when we released Echoes of Legend. So this is kind of the 3 short films that I had made over the course of that timeline.
And like in all of them, you have like your own team. So as you said, just like you're trying to, not just you and your computer. And from the perspective of, so it will be easier for people to understand the process of filmmaking with AI compared to the filmmaking as like what it used to be. What kind of the major differences that you think is just like possibly to highlight?
Sure. I mean, so the type of filmmaking I do is animation, and I think I'm going to speak a little bit more to the animation process than any other process. What makes, I think, my studio and mine's approach very powerful is that we basically draw a circle around what these AI tools should and should not be doing in the production process. So we create very clear boundaries around when and where the tools are being used. What does that mean? It means that we are writing a script first and foremost. You don't have a film if you don't have a script, right? Whether that's a script that a client provides or a script that I'm writing or a script that I'm collaborating with a script writer to write, we always start with a script. From there, we go into a storyboarding process and an animatic process. And at that point, there are no AI tools being used for the animatic process. We may or may not leverage AI tools with some of the storyboarding process so that our animatic artists can fully focus on animatic and not storyboarding per se. So it really just depends. But our goal with the animatic is that it's always human-led, because if you have a script and if you have a really strong animatic, you can constantly change and make adjustments between the script and the animatic so that you're not having to go back and redo thousands or hundreds of things with these AI tools that can be very unwieldy. And so we're really starting first and foremost with a human-centered approach. The next step in animation that's happening in tandem with animatic is concept art and art direction. So one of the things I love about animation is these bespoke art styles that you can create, these bespoke characters you can create. And instead of leaning completely on the generative AI tools to build and create those characters, we start first with a concept artist, right? We have them start with the script and we have them start with the animatic. So again, this is all building like a traditional animation pipeline. What we do leverage with AI in the concept art phase, though, is very tedious work. So, for example, if our concept artist is making 3 to 4 characters, one of the parts of concept art that can be very, very minutiae, can be very in the minutia, is create turnarounds and expression sheets of those characters. So we leverage AI to help automate that process for the concept artist. So all through the phases when we start to now use AI, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, is we're really thinking about, is the AI automating something an artist could be doing that would take them days and days to do and would take a lot of budget and a lot of time for them to do? Is the AI enhancing something that the artist has already done? Or is the AI replacing? And for us at MTH Studio, we're very hesitant when we use the word replacing, because we have to really look at that and ask ourselves, why is it replacing versus why is it not just enhancing or automating? So for example, when we're creating a 3D looking animated project, we might have 2D concept art because 3D models are very expensive. So we use the AI to enhance our 2D concept art to look 3D. Right? That's one way that we're using the AI to enhance the process that the artist has already done. Another part of the process that we're using to enhance is our layout process. So instead of having to do really strenuous layout in a more traditional sense, we're doing something called a key still phase, where we're like, okay, this character is placed here, this character is in this environment, and the shot is at this angle. It's almost like plussing up your storyboards from your animatic. And so we're using AI to help us automate that process, right? Instead of having a hand-drawn character, hand-drawn landscape for every single frame, which again can be very prohibitively expensive, we're using AI to automate that process. But we still have an animator, or we still have a 3D animator, or we still have a technical director, who are all very clear parts of these roles in traditional animation, guiding and leading that process and being in the tools. When it comes to editing, AI is not automating or enhancing anything. We're always editing fully with an editor in Premiere Pro. One of the things I like to say is you can generate something with AI and it probably gets you about 75 to 80% there. So what does that mean? That means our concept art, even if it's generated for turnarounds and expression sheets, our artist is going in and our artist is doing paint overs, or our artist is augmenting or optimizing certain shots or certain angles they really like, and maybe they're adding to it or they're plussing it up. That means if our technical director is generating a still image or a video that, even though it's about 75% there, we're now going into After Effects and we're doing different types of visual effects in After Effects, whether that's adding sparkles onto the ocean, whether that's adding a camera shake, whether that's literally adding movement. The other part of this is that we've also used traditional animation tools, right? We've used Toon Boom animation for lip sync and lip shapes for 2D characters. We've used Nuke for certain camera movements, right? We're just layering the AI tools into the traditional animation process. We've even used Maya for certain 3D modeling that we've been doing in some of our animated films, especially when we're doing some of that layout process. And so, yeah, really, at the end of the day, that's the visual production. And then on the audio production side, I'm a big believer that there still needs to be a score composer, there still needs to be a sound designer, there still needs to be an audio mixer. So none of that is being enhanced or automated or replaced by AI right now. Sometimes, depending on the script, we will do a generative AI voice for a secondary character. And then usually for our main characters, we will cast a voiceover actor and we'll have them kind of speak into the microphone in a recording booth. But I do know there have been other projects I've worked on where we've just completely done generative AI voiceover. And that isn't because we want to replace actors. It's usually because the budget doesn't allow us to hire actors and rent a recording booth. And that's the whole point for me of leveraging AI workflows with animation. It's that animation, in the history of it, has been very cost prohibitive. It has been very intense to make. It takes years to make an animated short film, especially if you have a small team. And I wonder if there's a way we leverage these workflows where it's still the human artist at the center point and the tool is really just being used as a tool to automate or enhance and maybe sometimes even replace certain aspects of the pipeline, that we can still make really strong human-led stories while also leveraging the fact that we can go a little faster or be a little cheaper as independent animation teams.
And maybe can I just quick add on? So for example, if you will compare the time aspect and the budget aspect, so how much could it save, like in a percentage, just approximately? Is it like a big chunk of?
That's really, I mean, that's really hard for me to like express, because the reality is that the cost of these films will begin to ramp up higher and higher dependent on the amount of minutes you're creating, right? So let's say you want to create a feature film or a series, that's still going to cost you at least $300,000 to $400,000, even if you're leveraging AI tools. When before it might cost you, $1 million or $2 million. Again, this is a small indie budget kind of thing, right? So I'm not saying that this could save you like millions of dollars overnight. I'm not proclaiming that suddenly it's 99% cheaper to make animated films. It's really dependent on the amount of minutes you're making, the amount of characters you have, the amount of environments you have, the amount of dialogue you have. Because as you exponentially increase all of those factors, like in a feature film or in a series versus a short film, you exponentially increase the cost of not just your human-led team, but also your AI tooling, because it just means you have to spend more money on credits. You have to spend more time figuring out really complex shots with multiple characters in it. That might need rotoscoping, that might need compositing, right? So even if you're leveraging these tools to go a little bit faster or be a little bit cheaper, the amount of creation you're doing, the cost will continue to ramp up versus ramp down, right? So what does that mean? It means if you're making a 5-minute film or even a 2.5-minute film, yes, your cost and your time is greatly shrunk. So, with us, we probably all weren't getting paid. I'll use a different case study. For a 5-minute film, we probably needed $150,000 to do it right, even though we were leveraging generative AI tools, and we had about 4 months to make it. And that's a 5-minute film, right? So imagine that being exponentially more expensive as you're getting bigger and bigger timelines, bigger and bigger creative. And that was with very simple, like we had maybe 3 characters, general backgrounds, right? Like it wasn't a whole complex thing like what Sony Animation does. So it's hard. You do save time, you do save budget, but I don't want to be the person on this podcast that tells you it's going to be so revolutionary that suddenly everybody can afford to make an animated film. You also need to make sure you have the right type of team members on your team. So one thing you tend to be able to do in a more independent circuit is that you can hire a couple of high-level people, like very high-level experts, and then hire a lot of junior people to backfill some of that work. And when you're leveraging AI, you actually need a lot more high-level skilled people, because my technical directors or my animation artists or my concept artists are not just like one trick types of people. They're like very well trained in all these different platforms like After Effects, like Premiere Pro, like Photoshop, like Nuke, like Maya, like Toon Boom. And on top of that, they understand and play with these AI tools. So those are very specialized people, and they don't tend to have very cheap day rates, right? So that's the other part of the puzzle that you have to recognize, is that even though you're maybe paying less people, you're probably paying more people at a higher level than you would just a one high up manager and a lot of junior people. So something to think about as well.
So I think, when you hear about a lot of these AI tools, a lot of them seem to sort of sell the idea that you can be this one-man studio where you're, in control of everything. But, as someone who's worked with, I guess, all these tools within your team, what is it like to sort of work with some of these tools? Do you think it's kind of matured on the side of collaboration, where it's easy to, I don't know, for different people to iteratively build on top of like any kind of AI generated work? Like, what has that experience been like for your team?
I don't think any of the tools right now are truly built for true collaboration. And the ones that are, like some of the aggregators out there, are actually prohibitively expensive when you actually put together a team of people and have them all use the team plan because the credits are really expensive. So it's actually right now, it's much cheaper for everybody to have their own Kling, their own Google Flow, their own Higgs field, right? There might be one shared login for maybe one or two people, but it's not that they're collaborating across the platform. So what we tend to have to do is be a stopgap, and I do think there are platforms like Luma trying to create things like whiteboarding that you can add all your different assets into like an unlimited whiteboard. But we've been doing that at MTH Studio even before generative AI. And so what we do is, because everyone's working on disparate platforms, we bring everything into a shared Miro board or a shared Figma board. We bring all of our video clips into like a sync sketch or a frame.io. So we're already having to kind of be that stopgap for collaboration through really good project management, like you would on any production. I would say, the idea of the one person, one laptop becomes a whole studio, that is totally possible. I'm not saying you can't be one person with your laptop and make a whole film by yourself. It's just the question of how the quality of the film and actually the time spent. So I say quality not because I don't think one person can create quality work, but because I don't think one person can really creatively sustain themselves. Like, I think good creativity is the process of different humans' perspectives getting involved, different people giving you feedback on the script, giving you feedback on the animatic, giving you feedback on the animation, right? Like, when you work in an echo chamber, you're just working with yourself and you're not getting new perspectives on how to improve. And so that's one part of that. I think the second part of that is not a lot of people are talking about the fact that this just takes time. And creativity as a whole takes a level of time investment. And I don't think a lot of creatives right now are recognizing that their time investment should also equal financial investment. They're like, yeah, it took me 5 days of all-nighters to make this film, and I paid, $600 to the AI platforms, and now I have a film. And I'm like, great, but how are you surviving? Like, are you being valued for the fact that you took those 5 days and sleepless nights to like make this thing? So what is your day rate? Is your day rate $1,200? Okay, 1,200 times 5, that needs to be in the budget of what you actually took to make the film. Just because you spent $600 on the AI platforms, you're not taking into account what your salary is or what your time spent is. And I think the creative process as a whole just takes time. It takes time to make a script, even if you're using generative AI to help you. It takes time to generate images, even if you're using generative AI to help you. It takes time to make video. Like, I just don't know if anyone I don't know if everybody fully understands that, like, time in platforms is a necessary piece of this puzzle. You don't just get in and suddenly make something out the gate that you love and adore.
And as well as just because everything is changing so quickly in AI, so just in the last 24 hours, it could be just multiple things that could happen. And it's really hard to keep up to date with everything that's going on. But if, for example, some of our listeners wants to start or like create or just like embark on this journey of doing some filmmaking and AI or just creating something with it, do you have any advice to them? Where to start, how to start, or what kind of like tools are you using?
Yeah, I mean, it depends like your background and expertise if you come from a more film background, I would say start with Google Flow. It's one of the stronger ecosystems of tools all talking together with Nana Banana and VO. And the Google Flow sort of like interface feels like it's trying to be optimized more for filmmakers. If you're like, I'm not really a filmmaker, but I just want to play with the tools, I mean, I would definitely start with something like Runway or an aggregator like Higgs Field or an aggregator like OpenArt. Aggregators basically mean you can access all of these models in one platform. Aggregators tend to be a little more expensive though, because they're giving you the convenience of accessing models versus when you use native like Google Flow or Kling, or even Seedream, like it tends to be cheaper. I would say another platform you could check out is Luma. I personally haven't really used Luma a lot in my productions, but a lot of my colleagues, are talking about it as sort of adding on. I just don't know if Luma has the best image generators. I don't think they have the best video generators, but they have some interesting tools they've been building. So yeah, it really depends on what you're trying to do with AI, but that's where I would start. If you are a more seasoned filmmaker and you want to look at this as an actual production tool, I would look at something like Google Flow or the ByteDance system with Kling. If you're more of a, amateur or hobbyist, I would start with something like Higgsfield or Pixverse or Pixverse or FreePix. Sorry, one of those is a dialogue platform. Anyway, or I would start with something like even Runway, although Runway to me still has a lot of different things, or Midjourney. But I think once you kind of get into the Runway Midjourney world, you're basically like dropping yourselves into an ecosystem, versus if you start with like an aggregator, you get access to all these different LLMs and you can kind of play with all the different aspects of it in one platform. I would also say, the idea that all of this is changing so rapidly, it is and it isn't. At the end of the day, an image generator is an image generator. A video generator is a video generator. At the end of the day, like a text-based prompting system is a text-based prompting system. The feeling of like we're getting left behind is like actually a marketing tool that all these tech companies are using to make you feel like you're behind, to give you this feeling of lack, so you go and you buy the next thing. Oh, I'm not a real blah 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 if I don't go buy the new Luma thing. I'm not a real blah 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 if I don't get access to the new Seedream thing. Like that to me is just like a lot of like marketing hullabaloo. If you have a very good story, if you are being very diligent with how you're executing that story, if you're being very diligent with how you are approaching it as a filmmaker, yes, your film might look a little bit quote unquote like dated or whatever, but everyone's film in these platforms are going to look dated unless you're using a very bespoke art style. Like that's just the reality, especially if you're doing live action. If you're doing live action looking films in AI, your film's going to look dated no matter who you are, no matter what tool you get access to, because those things are constantly changing. But if you're telling a good story, that to me is going to have a much higher impact than what your film looks like. And if you're more in animation like me, it's really about how you're using the art style to leverage the fact that your project might have older tools it's using, or leveraging the fact that you can't even tell it's made with AI. Like to me as a filmmaker, I am successful as a filmmaker if I make something, whether it's made with After Effects, whether it's made with Gen AI, whether it's made with Nuke or Pro Tools, whatever. I'm a successful filmmaker if somebody watches my film and they go, wow, I really like that character. Wow, I really like that world. Wow, I really liked this moment. Instead of being like, was this made with Luma? Da 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 da. Was this made with Seedream? Da 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 da. Like, then I'm not successful as an artist. You don't go into a theater and think, what tool was this made? Unless you really are bored, right? You're not thinking about, oh, I wonder if they used Premiere Pro to make that cut, unless you're bored. If you like the characters, if you like the world, that's all that you're interested in. And that to me is like, that to me should be the goal for every filmmaker who's using AI tools. It's not about people knowing what tool you used, or thinking about it. It's about them wanting to engage more with your characters and your world and your story.
Nice. And maybe on that note, like what is your maybe hopes and predictions for the future of kind of the film industry and maybe AI and how that all kind of interleaves? I know the industry is kind of tending towards one way, but where do you like to see it go?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, look, I think there's like a lot of different ways to talk about this. I'll start first with like I think more of the studio system, because I think what's really important about these tools is the context of who's using them and why. Like my hope is that the studio executives recognize that they play a role in protecting the creatives through all of this, right? The creatives can definitely leverage tools, but the executives have to be the one that says, we still need to pay creatives what they're worth. We still need to pay X amount of humans to make this film. We don't just need to fully rely on generative AI and wipe out half of a department, right? That's a very important piece of this puzzle. It's like not even talking about the tools. It's not even talking about what we as artists can do. It's like, it's a serious call to executives who are looking to cut budgets and make more work. That is still possible, but don't cut people, right? Think about how you really can protect people through this process as much as possible. You know, instead of maybe making one feature film, maybe now they can make 3 feature films, but each of those feature films has a smaller team working on them versus the one team they could have hired for feature films, right? That to me is the hope of what the studios can really do to protect what is the human-centered process, instead of just making 20 feature films with like a very small team of people just working like a sweatshop and producing not good work. That's one piece of the puzzle. I think when it comes to independent creators, I will caution you to not rely on these tools for your whole bread and butter, because our access to this tool is literally given to us by a company, right? And it's easy to say, oh, well, Adobe's been around forever, so Google Flow is going to be around forever. Well, Adobe's whole business model is creative tools. Google's business model is not creative tools. Google's business model is selling data, gathering data, being our main web search platform. So it could just take one Google executive to say, well, we're not making any money with Google Flow, so let's make the price prohibitively expensive. Or let's just sell Google Flow to one studio who's going to pay us millions of dollars for it, and we'll take this off our hands. So we shouldn't expect these tools to exist forever at the affordable price that they are. And now that they are affordable, and now that we have access to them, I would say to independent creators, start playing with them, start leveraging them, start using them, because this may or may not be the way it's going to go for the future. And the reason I say that is, you know, Netflix has become much more expensive than when it first came online. And that's because Netflix doesn't really make money from subscriptions. They're slowly trying to make it more expensive so they can make more money. I think it'll be the same with these generative AI platforms. They're going to slowly make it more and more and more and more expensive for you to access them. I think another prediction I would like to make is that I think while there will be more content out there, I don't know if the audience will be captured by all the content, right? So just because you can make something doesn't mean that you'll have a really amazing fan base or audience willing to watch it. And I think that's something we have to remember as filmmakers, as creatives. We can make work, but if we make it for an audience that doesn't feel connected to the work, then there's no distribution model, there's no financial model, and we're just making work for ourselves, which is totally valid if that's the type of creator you are. But if you're the type of creator who wants to make something where everybody comes to the theater to watch it, or you want to see thousands of hundreds of thousands and millions of views on YouTube, you really have to think about, how is my project unique? How is my project authentic? And how is my project actually touching people? Because if we're all inundated and saturated with quote unquote films and quote unquote content, how is yours going to rise above the rest? And that might mean going slower, taking more time, adding more to your team, having a variety of points of view. And now we're just back to the traditional process, right? Instead of speeding it all up for Gen AI. So I think this is one big sort of like working cycle. And I think there will still be beautiful films made without Gen AI platforms. And I hope to make one of those films one day, because I think there's something still really magical about making films without some of these tools. It's just like when you still see a very beautiful hand-drawn animated film instead of watching a 3D animated film over and over again like we do right now. You know, so I think all of it has a place in the world. It's just making your story and your characters and your world as engaging as possible.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And if you have any last messages or something that you want to leave our listeners with, and if there's, what would be the best way for them to contact you? If they have any additional questions, we'll put all of the links into the description. So you just...
Sure. Yeah, you can reach out to me via my website, michaelaternasky-holland.com. You can also reach out to me via LinkedIn, which is also my name, Michaela Ternasky-Holland. So yeah, excited to have been here today. Thank you for having me on the podcast, and thank you so much for listening.
Likewise, thank you for joining us. Yeah, it's been great hearing all your great insights that you have to share. Yeah, and I think it makes us a little bit more hopeful about the future of film, having, people not going towards the side of completely replacing everyone with AI. So I think that's generally true for all industries, I think. So yeah. And to
Thank
our
you so
listeners,
much.
thank you. Yeah, thank you for listening up to this point, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.